Let's go to Pembo now. David Penberthy, News Corp columnist, host of Breakfast on Adelaide's Radio 5AA. He's an Aussie Rules, Sturt and Adelaide Crows man as well, but having edited the Daily Telegraph, knows a bit about State of Origin fever. Did you get to watch it in the Free Settlers State last night?
I did actually, Chris, and I was texting mates back in Sydney. A few profanity-laden exchanges being sent between Adelaide and Sydney about some of those forward passes by the Maroons that they didn't pick up on. But Queensland were well and truly the best team on the night, and through gritted teeth, I reckon that second try of theirs is one of the all-time greats of Origin. It was a sensational game and they deserved to win. Yeah,
I'll tell you what, the argument on radio this morning was that the ref might have blown the whistle about 2 seconds early. That might have cost New South Wales the game. But how about that? A couple of double Blues supporters from Adelaide talking about State of Origin. We better move on to something we know something about. And tell us about your thoughts on constitutional reform. And there's quite surprising elevation of the Republic debate again, straight after Labor was sworn in, and just when everyone's celebrating the Platinum Jubilee for the Queen.
Yeah, look, there was a bit of hoopla last week with the Australian Republican movement becoming quite excited about the fact that New South Wales Senator Matt Thistlethwaite had been confirmed as the Assistant Minister for the Republic. I had a bit of a look at it last week in my column, and I must admit, Chris, that part of my thinking was actually guided by the piece you wrote for last Saturday's Weekend Australian, which I thought was, without trying to blow smoke up your proverbial, I actually thought that was a hugely important piece of journalism, someone looking at the Uluru Statement and the proposal for a voice from a Conservative perspective, and I think rightly identifying it not as some gesture-driven sort of orgy of sentiment, rather a sort of pragmatic and practical thing. And I must admit two things. Firstly, I didn't think that the Republic figured in any prominent way at all in the last federal election campaign. It wasn't like Labor was campaigning on a promise to breathe urgent life into the Republican conversation. But much more importantly, and I say this as someone who did vote yes to a Republic all those many years ago, I think it would be almost a sort of middle-class conceit for Republicans to try to crash the party at a time when we are trying to have a mature, consensus-driven conversation about how best to implement the Uluru Statement. I reckon Republicans have got to take a massive back seat on this and not have these arbitrary timelines about, oh, well, you know, on the sad moment when the Queen is no longer with us, we can hit the go button on this straight away. To his credit, I think Albo made that very clear. We spoke to him on radio last Friday and asked him to explain why this minister had been appointed, and he said, no, Uluru comes first. But, you know, at a time when people are paying $12 for a lettuce, do you really think that the Australian people are up for not one but two debates about referenda that will very easily be shot down if it looks like the government isn't focused on bread and butter issues?
I think you're spot on, Pembo. I think the voice is a much more important debate for us to have now, whether people oppose it or support it. They have the debate, put the Republic on the back burner. And I tell you what, if you praise my columns, mate, that's a good way to get invited back on the show. But you mentioned...
I'll be on for an hour every week.
You mentioned, of course, the cost of living issues, which are so important right now. Now, this came up today in an interview with Anthony Albanese on FM radio, because KFC are talking about replacing lettuce with cabbage in order to save costs at the moment. Here's Albo on FM.
My son loves KFC.
Me too.
When he hears about it, he's going to be devastated.
Well, tell him this, Prime Minister, because
a bit extreme, doesn't it? Cabbage isn't the same as lettuce. It's just wrong. I'll put it on the list. We've got a cabinet meeting today, so I'll put it on the list.
And also,
Cabbage Gate.
Yeah, the PM there with Kyle and Jackie O. The lettuce versus cabbage goes to the cabinet agenda. Beautiful work.
Well, it's not just KFC. I mean, if you put it in a Sydney context, you'd talk about doner kebabs. I think in Melbourne they call them gyros and spell them with a G. Here they're known as gyroses, the old Greek lamb souvlaki. There's a hell of a lot of things that are very reliant on the iceberg lettuce. And it's interesting how it's very quickly become a symbol of what we're going to see with, you know, whole chicken prices and cheese prices and dairy, which is so reliant on electricity, reliant on the sort of fertiliser that historically has been sourced from Ukraine. This is going to be a huge issue for Labor, and the tension, I think, will be, particularly when you've got state governments, you know, WA with their staggering surplus, giving people $400 cheques to give them a bit of relief off their power bills. How does the government prosecute the case about this mind-blowing level of debt that they say that they've inherited, albeit debt that was driven wholly by the pandemic, with these calls that are fuelled by state governments like Andrews and Dom Perrottet this week, giving money directly to people to help offset the cost of living? It's an unenviable task for a new government.
It's a bizarre.
Achilles heel will always be economic management.
Yeah, it is a bizarre paradox indeed. Thanks for joining us, Pembo. I appreciate it.